Well, buy now, pay later. Is it a great consumer product or is it a debt trap that needs to be regulated? The Assistant Federal Treasurer, Stephen Jones, announced today that the government will regulate companies like Afterpay and Zip that provide these services. Now, to this point, they've avoided regulation because they don't charge customers interest and therefore they're not regarded as credit providers. That means they don't have to do credit checks on people who sign up. That's a good thing for consumers because it means that you get access to money quickly and they don't look at your credit history. But it's a bad thing for people who shouldn't have credit in the first place and wind up with massive debts. Last year, a group of more than 100 community organisations, including the Salvation Army, Anglicare and Wesleyan Mission, wrote a letter to the government asking that something be done. They gave an example of one person who called a financial counsellor having racked up multiple buy now, pay later debts, $8,000 worth. This person was a student on a youth allowance of $522 a fortnight. So you can imagine the trouble they were in. Here's the Assistant Treasurer, Stephen Jones, talking about the need for government to do something.
Well, we want to ensure that while there is competition and while there is innovation, that the harmful effects of poor marketing practices and poor lending practices don't impact, particularly on vulnerable communities.
Caleb, what do you think? Do you think the government needs to step in and regulate these companies?
Of course. I mean, it's rather ludicrous to think that there is a loophole like this that means, you know, someone who is essentially providing credit can do so without there being any rules around it. We have credit checks and, of course, regulation of the banking industry for a reason, because people who have a propensity to fall into debt that they can't service end up in very bad situations. And I think particularly with a thing like buy now, pay later, it's more encouragement to spend, I think, than even a credit card, because at least when you whack something on a credit card, you can go and check the credit balance. Yeah. And if you spend too much money, you can look at it and go, heebie Jesus, there is so much money I'm spending here. Whereas the buy now, pay later, oh, well, you know, something that costs $100 or $200 or $500, all of a sudden, well, it's only $20 a week for a month. I can do that. And then you start doing it more and you start doing it more and you start doing it more.
Have you ever used it?
And you create a trap.
Have you ever used it? Because I was just about to say that's spoken like someone who's never used it.
Why is that? I have credit cards.
The way buy now, pay later works is it uses your credit card or your debit card. So you're already, if it's credit, you're already spending money that you don't have. No different. And the bank's already done the vetting, because when you apply for a credit card, the bank says, oh, that's nice, but this is what we're saying is your credit card limit based on the details that you've given us. What you guys are referring to is wage lending, which is very different. But buy now, pay later is an incredibly good innovation. That's why they've had 700 million, that's way more than is in Australia, 7 million Aussies using this thing, myself included, because you're buying the same thing, but instead of it hitting your credit card or coming straight out of your account, you have 4 instalments, monthly instalments. It's actually a great innovation. And at a time when government has done nothing to tackle the cost of living, which is taking middle Australia to a breaking point, just trying to keep their mortgages afloat, all the stats show that's why a lot of people are turning to these means, because they're using it on basic essentials like food, like petrol, because they're spending way more on their mortgages than they were previously. For shame, I thought you two were for small government.
But we're not saying ban it. We're simply saying it should be regulated in the same way as
the wage lending should be. The wage lending, not buy now, pay later.
Anyone who can't get a credit card because they've got bad credit can use this system.
What you're talking about is the wage lending side of things.
No,
which
it's
is
exactly the same.
It isn't. They're giving people a massive sum up front. They're spotting them their next pay in advance.
If you've got organisations like the Salvation Army, like Wesley Mission, saying there are major problems with the
deal with a great
system,
many impoverished people, yes.
So what would be wrong with having a small degree of regulation so that people don't get themselves into all sorts of trouble and then wind up having to be dealt with.
A small degree of
such as
regulation.
Western
You're
Mission.
not quoting the government there. We don't know what they're looking at putting in place.
They said
haven't
they'll make
given
it
us any
scalable. It won't be
details.
to the extent that credit cards are regulated, but there will be some regulation so that these companies have to be at least responsible in giving money to people who may not be able to pay it back.
So we're basing an entire nation's policy around buy now, pay later and wage lending.
No, we're putting in some
on the few
sensible
people
measures
who can't
to protect
do
vulnerable
it
people
sensibly.
so they don't get themselves
James,
into all
after
sorts
the
of
last 3 years, you're still buying the government telling you that they're doing
I'm not
it
a
to
total
protect
cynic
the
like you.
vulnerable.
Yeah,
That's what they
I don't
say
believe
about
everybody is
every
evil.
policy, no matter what it relates
I happen to
to.
believe that most politicians are good people trying to do the right thing.